So I am really excited to introduce this week's guest, author and TED speaker Nathaniel A. Turner, JD, MALS, is a self-described humanity propulsion engineer. Nate is the author of several books, including the children's book series, The Amazing World of STEM, and his history-making book, Raising Superman. Turner's appeared on many media outlets, including The Washington Post, Black Enterprise, Fatherly, iHeartRadio, The Good Men Project, SiriusXM, and U.S. News and World Reports. Corporations, municipalities, and NGOs like Anthem Inc., the National Collegiate Athletic Association, the National Education Association, the U.S. Department of Education, the City of Indianapolis, and the National Society of Black Engineers invite Nate to share his practical message for living the life we've always imagined while also serving the greater good. A modern-day Renaissance man as evidenced by the diversity of his education, including a bachelor in accounting, master's in history and theology, and doctor of jurisprudence combined with a wide range of personal experiences and professions are only a part of what makes his wide-ranging presentations can't-miss events. What truly sets Nate apart from the others is his unique, oft-times comical ability, not only to see the world differently, but to challenge his audiences in an edutaining way, to live outside the box so that the world might be able to experience us at our very best. As a zealous advocate that every person has an opportunity to maximize their human potential, Nate regularly shares through books, courses, workshops, and conferences a backward design life process initially created to help his unborn child become an intellectually ambitious, great global citizen who would meet the rigorous education requirements of the top colleges and universities without means of wealth, privilege, legacy, status, fraud, bribery, cheating, or Adobe Photoshop. Turner's son not only met Harvard's admission benchmarks, that is, test scores in the top 1%, 33 college credits by his junior year, proficiency in 4 languages, and left home after his junior year in high school to play soccer in Brazil and started a foundation to address teen homelessness. He eviscerated the profile criterion by his 16th birthday. At present, Turner's son is a 4th-year electrical and computer engineering PhD candidate at one of the world's premier graduate engineering schools. Today, those tools, techniques, and strategies initially created to help his Gen Zer thrive in the 4th industrial revolution are educational and life development staples for students and parents of all ages and organizations worldwide. Through his 501c3, the League of Extraordinary Parents, he provides parents with a template to independently and tactically raise children from conception to college. Nate works to help more children use education to improve their lives, communities, and society at large. So I'd like to welcome Nathaniel Turner to Somewhere in the Middle with Michelle Berard. Thank you, Nathaniel, for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me, or did I invite myself? But thank you for having me.
Well, you know that I like to start with 2 questions. So if you're ready, I'll ask those 2 questions.
Right. I think I'm ready.
Okay. Nathaniel Turner, who are you and how did you become who you are today?
Wow. So who am I? I usually tell people I'm just a guy. That's my answer. How did I get here? Well, my mom, 56 years ago, delivered me a week ago yesterday. But I'm originally from Gary, Indiana. And I've been writing and speaking in public now for, I don't know, the better of the past 10 plus years or so. I'm probably here today, most importantly, because I have a son who decided to publish some letters that I wrote him throughout his childhood. And it is those letters that sort of, if you want to say, jettisoned me to some little small stage. He's responsible for that. So I am who I am mostly as an adult because of the child that I have in my life.
Wow. I think a lot of parents don't even recognize how much their children shape who they become as real adults, not the little baby adults that you are when you're in your 20s or whatever.
Right.
But when you're a solid adult.
Yeah, I would say everything that I've done it to me that has any value or meaning in the last 26 years is because of him.
So tell us about the letters. What was about these letters that made them so special?
Sure. So I had as I always tell people, I had a tumultuous childhood, and I didn't have any memories of my relationship with my father as a child that were positive. My mother would say to me all the time that you and your dad were really close when you were small. And I was like, I have no recollection of that. Only thing I remember are all the bad things. And what I didn't want to do as a father was to replicate what my father had done. So many times when I talk to young fathers, I hear about how bad things were for them. And then essentially we just repeat and rinse and start over the same bad thing. And I wanted to do something different. So I started making notes about what I hoped for my then unborn child. And when that child was born, something happened. Something clicked, and I just wanted to. All of a sudden, I just wanted to do more than just make notes. So I started writing him, and I wrote him stuff that he wouldn't have seen until about age 2. And he walked to the mailbox with me one afternoon and asked me for mail. I got mail out the mailbox. Mine were bills. And he said, "Daddy, where's my mail?" I was like, "Dude, there's nothing good about the mailbox. Trust me. It's either junk or bills, and for me, they're both the same." So, but Daddy, where's my mail? And so he continued as we walked across the street. He continued to ask for mail, and I got in the car that afternoon, went to Target, bought some greeting cards and some postcards, came home and started writing him notes or writing him on the greeting cards and postcards. And Michelle, what happened was I couldn't, I didn't have enough space in the greeting cards or the postcards. There was so much stuff pouring out of me from my own childhood as I looked at him that I found myself needing more space. So I started writing him letters. And I just continued to write him letters until to this day. In fact, this morning I got up and I thought about something that we did around this time of the year. And I said, you know what? I need to write him about a memory that I have that's relevant to what he's doing in his life right now.
That is so beautiful. And the power of a letter, a handwritten letter, we lose that a little with email and everything. How do your thoughts come together differently in a letter?
So the letters, while I thought I was giving him what he asked for, I realized I was giving myself something too. So for one, I wanted to share with him this process for life. So I said, okay, listen, I'm going to write a 2-year-old, but I'm not going to write him as if he's a 2-year-old. I'm going to write him as if he's 32. And I'm not going to use 2-year-old language. I'm going to use 32-year-old language, primarily because I want to expand his vocabulary. I also wanted to expand my own vocabulary. So here's a good opportunity to do that. But I wanted to write him lessons that if something were to happen to me, because I never thought I would live as long as I've lived. So I assumed that I would be gone. Either I'd be gone or I would mess it up. And the only memories he would have of me would be through these letters. So I wanted to make sure that whatever I said to him had some value beyond just age 2, 3, 4, 5. He started to read because of the letters that I wrote him. So when I would come home after work, I'd go to the office, mail the postcards to him. A few days I get home and he'd say, "Hey, Daddy, today I got mail." And I'd say, "Yes, I know." And he said, "Daddy, read it to me." And I said, "No, I'm not going to keep reading. I'm not going to write and read, dude." And he said, "Well, cool. Well, teach me to read." So, around age 2 or so, he learned to read. And he learned to read inspired by this idea he wanted to read his father's letters. As I got older, and he got older, I realized that the letters were a great way to communicate with him. I'm kind of an emotional person. I don't know if you can tell that today. And so sometimes in my excitement or in my frustration, he would look at my face and predetermine what it was that I was thinking or feeling. And so any words that would come out would be completely dismissed. But when I would write him, all he could do is focus on the words that were on the page. And I could make sure that I remove the emotion from the letter unless I wanted to actually convey emotion. So it was real helpful in that regard. And so I wrote him like that way until till he was 16. And before he left to go to Brazil, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, I packed the letters up in a binder and I gave them to him and said, you know, we're going to be 7,000 miles apart. I doubt very seriously that you're going to want to hear what your father has to say to you from 7,000 miles away. But I've probably mostly told you everything you needed to know. And I put some of the letters in a binder, I think 34, 35 letters in a binder. And I gave them to him and I left him with the letters and came back to America while he stayed in Brazil.
Wow. Okay, you said a couple, I do want to talk about that,
Right.
among other things, but you said something that really struck me. Why did you think that you were going to mess it up or not be there in some way? What gave you that thought?
So when most men model themselves after the primary man in their house. My father messed it up. So I had no reason to believe that I was going to be better than my father. I mean, we like to believe that we're going to be better than someone, and we say it all the time, but oftentimes we become exactly what we see. So I've seen some terrible things. I see my father do some terrible things, and I wasn't sure that I would always be able to get out of my own way. Again, I'm a guy from Gary who was told the best I could ever hope to do in my life was join the military. My high school guidance counselor said, you know, you're not college material. The best you can hope to do is join. That's your best hope, is that that the military would accept you. So I wasn't a guy that was, you know, maybe on the outside appears like you have lots of confidence about what you're going to do and become, but I wasn't very confident about that, and I certainly was not confident about being a father. I mean, in fact, I tell people all the time that when my wife and I left the hospital, you know, when they kick you out 24 hours to 48 hours after the baby's born, the only instructions I had on what to do was about putting the car seat in. I had no idea what I was doing with a child. I mean, I had no idea. And so you'd say, well, how am I going to be a parent? Well, the only parent that you know is the parent that parented you. And you're like, well, how do I not make the same mistakes this person did? So I wasn't sure that I was gonna be a very good father. I certainly wasn't sure I was gonna be a very good husband, and that's still up for debate.
Do we need to get your wife in here to ask her?
You might need to. Hey, right? It's all relative, right? and so I wasn't certain. And then the things that I wanted to do earlier in my life, I was fairly certain that historically I'd never seen the people who modeled what I wanted to do live very long. So I wasn't sure I was going to be around.
Wow. Okay. What did you want to do like that?
I wanted initially to be the foremost civil rights leader in the country. I'd gone to my bachelor's degrees in accounting. My master's degrees are in history and theology, and I have a law degree. So I thought, why don't we take a look at the civil rights struggle, which today I think of it differently. I would just say a human rights struggle. I said, well, we've never had one person who understood all of those various elements. A person who understood the economic component, which is where Dr. King was moving to, a person who understood the legal component, like a Thurgood Marshall. And typically all of our, you know, I shouldn't say all, many of our leaders come from a theological background, and we've never had a person who had all of those things combined. And so I had all of those things combined. And I figured, well, either I'm going to die or I'm going to be assassinated in my character. Either way, it's not going to work out too well for me and for my family. So that's what I wanted to do initially.
Wow. But you seem to have moved toward education as your focus, which is, some would argue, is related, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How did that transition happen?
Well, yeah, I had a wife and a child, and so I had that they forced me to pivot. So Michelle, I'm named after Nat Turner. So in some ways, I tell people I didn't really have a choice. My parents intentionally named me, my father in particular, intentionally named me after his favorite, other than Malcolm X, his favorite human rights advocate, Nat Turner. My mother thought she was naming me a good Christian name, Nathaniel, Hebrew, meaning gift of God. My father was like, nope, we're, we're, we're naming him after Nat Turner. He wanted to name me Malcolm. My mother was having nothing to do with that in 1965. You're not going to be named Malcolm. So I really kind of had no choice. Growing up in Gary, every time I stepped in the classroom, every teacher asked me, "Do you know who you are?" I'm like, "Oh my God, yes, I know who I'm named after." Can we talk about something else? But when I got married, and I was again doing a little of that stuff. As an undergrad, I formed the Black Student Union at Butler University. Got the Minority Student Affairs Department started. I tell the students when I go back, every ethnic or social organization that's based around race or inequity or equality exists now because in 1983 there were 38 students of color out of 3,000 students on the campus, and it was us, and I can't take all the credit for it. I was the founding president that got those things off the ground, and we started a statewide organization for minority students in Indiana. And then I went to law school at Valpo. We had a little episode and closed the campus and made national and international news, and I was the spokesperson for that. So when I got married, my wife worked for the university, and she said, "You can't keep walking around here calling people massas, right? I work at this institution, right? Right? I'm like, yeah, but it's true. Right? These young men are not graduating. These young women are not graduating." So that sort of changed my perspective. I had a wife and a child, and they didn't ask for that. So I'm like, I guess I have to pivot and do. That's not something that they should have to, a burden that they should have to bear. So I pivoted.
And with all of that, you used your combination of your letters, your background, and just sounds like just plain focused fathering to help your son raise to a pretty amazing level.
Yeah, my focus turned to just figuring out how to be a good husband and a great father. I mean, just that was my focus. And so I guess in some ways, the same things that allowed me to figure out how to get to college, graduate from college, somehow get to graduate school and law school, I took those same tools and strategies and implemented those things to become a father and to help my son. I always would say to folks that my child didn't ask to be here, which I don't think enough parents understand that way. We say we want to be a parent, and then we don't want to be a parent. So but the child didn't ask to be here. You can't send the child back now. You don't like how the child is behaving. Like, you maybe should have had a plan, more of a plan to begin with, because this is what children do. So yeah, I turned my attention to them. I would say one last thing. In graduate school, this is probably the thing that helped convince me. My graduate school thesis was supposed to be a 25-page paper, and I was writing about the African church in America. I didn't call it the African American church, but I titled the paper "Amazing Disgrace: How the African Church in America Has Underdeveloped the African Community in America." And after my wife read that paper, which then turned to like a 150-page paper, with 25 pages to 150 pages, I was like, I should publish this. And the look she had on her face was like, dude, everybody's gonna burn us at a stake if you publish that. So I'm like, okay, all right, maybe not. Maybe I should do something different.
Well, tell me, now you've got me curious about the paper.
All right.
What are your indictments of what I'm going to call the Black church, for lack of a better phrase?
Absolutely.
What are some of your indictments against the Black church?
Okay, so I'll say this. I spent a brief period in the pulpit. So I was privy to seeing some things that were very disconcerting. So again,
and which denomination? Do you mind if I ask?
No problem. AME.
Okay.
Right. But what I saw, for example, in Gary, is that there were at the time, there were over 100 churches in the city of Gary. for a city of about 70,000 people. Every corner there's a church, every corner there's a liquor store, every corner there's a place that you can buy chicken or fish. But we have no banks, we have no hospitals, we have no so my first complaint about the church was the economic standing of the church, that every Sunday you're collecting all these dollars from impoverished people, and yet there are no institutions that exist to help those impoverished people change the quality of their life. So that was one of them. One of my other issues was the status of Black women in the church. That 70% of parishioners are Black women, the folks who support the church. And at the time, there was very few Black women in the pulpit. So I would just qualify that as leadership. And I'd say, well, this is interesting. On the one hand, you tell a Black woman she can be anything she wants to be, but she can't be a pastor. Mm-hmm. She can't lead the church, but she could be president. She could be a dentist, a doctor, a lawyer, but she can't be something that doesn't even require any real education. Like, this is sort of an amazing statement. I was concerned about the continuation of this use of color, of Black and white, and the recognition that that most people are associated with a landmass, and there's no place called Black land. There's no place called white land. I'm like, these are social constructs, and we know it, and yet we continue to buy in it. So there was things like that. I think, and I went on and on, like breaking down every social structure, socioeconomic structure, and I'm just like, this is a disgrace that a nation of people that I think at the time within the nation, our collective gross national spending would have made us like the 7th largest nation in the world. Mm-hmm. I said, well, we don't have anything. We don't control anything. In fact, we controlled more after the Emancipation Proclamation and Reconstruction than we do. This was in 1993, 94, than we did in 1993, 94. So,
right.
No.
Yeah, there's some argument that desegregation did us a disservice from that perspective.
Yeah, well, and I would say we could look at desegregation, but I also think it is us. So like when you look at, for example, grocery stores, and I know we're probably going in a direction that this was not intended, but folks always talk about food deserts, and I said, do you understand why food deserts exist? We're mad at the grocery stores for not being in Black communities, but the truth is that grocery stores not in Black communities because Black folks who have the capacity to support the grocery stores have all moved out and live in white communities. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't live in Gary anymore. So if my spending power makes me an upper middle class person, and the grocery store is intended to serve upper middle class people, and there are no upper middle class people, or certainly not enough in the community, well, then they're going to move. But I said, as a person who works in the financial industry now, I'd say all the time to folks, we're very duplicitous in our arguments, which is that on the one hand, we're asking corporations to do more and do better. At the same time, we're counting on those corporations to deliver us returns on our 401ks. Mm-hmm. And so you can't have it both ways.
I am going to push back on this, but
sure. Good.
From this perspective. What about socially conscious companies now that try to do some social good while making a profit? And I'm thinking of like Tom's and some of these others that, buy a pair of shoes and we donate a pair of shoes, that kind of thing. Is there not space for that model? Not saying that you got to donate the food, but yeah, maybe you have some stores that are less profitable, or maybe even lose a little bit of money because they're supported by the other stores to some extent to make sure that everybody has access.
Sure. No, I'm all for this idea of this social awareness or social consciousness, and some people call it social capitalism. I'm all for it. But in America, the way that corporations are constituted, the sole responsibility of the corporation is to maximize the shareholders' wealth. So when that is why you exist, you have a hard time getting people to continue to invest in your company if your company is then taking its resources and putting it someplace else. I agree with you completely.
Mhm.
But when clients come to me and they say, how did I do this year? And if you say, well, you did 15%, and I had this happen to me one year. Um, I had a gentleman come to me, his account performed phenomenally, but his neighbors did a few percentage more. I was like, well, that's that wasn't what you said you wanted to do. And all he could think of was what I want to compete. So that was
Interesting.
yeah. And I'd say the other thing is when I say we're a little duplicitous. So I'd say, for example, if you go to Target, or I want to use Target, there's any store that has a self-checkout lane.
Mhm.
I would ask people, which lane do you choose? It's 5 o'clock. You just got off work. You're tired. The store is getting crowded. There's 4 or 5 young brothers and sisters working at the cash registers and bagging. There's 20 lines that say self checkout. Which one do you choose?
Or are you asking me this question?
Sure.
Because it varies.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Because I don't expect to go into a Walmart or a Target or anything like that and get out quickly.
Okay.
I think I got over that when I was living in California. I'm like, why are all these people here? There's so many people. Why aren't they like at work or at church or where, depending on the time I was going? I'm like, y'all aren't supposed to be here now. I know how to go to Walmart when there's nobody there. So I no longer expect to get out of those types of stores quickly. So I only go to them when I intend to have the time.
Got you. Well, so my point that I ask folks is that most people tell me, well, I take the self-checkout line. And I said, well, that's fine. But then don't complain. Don't tell me about how much you care about your community. Because when you take the self-checkout line, someone like my son writes an algorithm that determines how many bags of groceries you'll do on your own. And the next time you come in, there's not 3 people, there's now 2.
Right.
You don't need them, right? Because we've eliminated them because we figured out that you're willing to bag your groceries, not get any discount whatsoever under the pretext that you're so busy that you got to hurry up and get the 5 minutes that you would spending time having somebody bag your groceries is not as important as you rushing out. So they'll lose a job and you'll have your groceries faster. But those people are going to go back to the community and they're going to struggle.
I see how you say it's duplicitous. I understand that. Yeah. I think it's interesting though, because you're also competing with technology. So it's not just once they know they can do something at the corporate level, then they often implement it and we just get used to it. So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing too.
Yeah. Well, again, if the corporations exist to maximize shareholders' wealth and the most expensive thing that I have is labor, buy labor. Yeah. But I don't know how I probably got you sidetracked, so I apologize.
No, it's fine. No, but this is what I like to hear. I like to hear people's thoughts on these things. I think they're important topics. And I don't think they get enough time, people discussing them, in a slightly dispassionate way so that, it's not all these emotions flying and crazy talk coming out. So I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
But I do want to get back to your son because you mentioned leaving him in Brazil at 16 years old. And let me just say, for those of you who don't know, Brazil is not a place where you go around just dropping kids off in the middle of the okay, bye. So what brought him to Brazil? How did that come about? And tell me about your son.
Sure. So my son's name is Naeem. His middle name is Kahari. He has 2 last names. They're hyphenated, Turner Bendelli. His full name means he is benevolent king, despite being born from slavery and born away from home. He was not named until the 8th day. We took him home from the hospital with his original birth certificate just said baby boy Turner. We had known you, Michelle. I got a feeling you'd have been part of the village. You would have gotten a letter from us with 10 male names and 10 female names. And we would ask you to come over and spend time with him and assess his personality and his characteristics and help us to name him. Our thought was that we were not going to be able to raise him by ourselves, that we truly believed it takes a village, and we wanted to create a village composed of really bright, intelligent people, not some of the village idiots that raised us. And and we figured that people were invested, similarly to the way that the Mufasa held Simba over the Pride Land. We thought we might be onto something. So that's the origin story, sort of, Naeem. My wife and I wrote Harvard before he was born to request an application. The application was for him, for this unborn child. And we took apart the application from Harvard and came up with this template that we wanted to follow to use to help to raise him. We didn't know at the time when we wrote them for the application. We were just thinking about the academic requirements, and we're thinking, hey, if, how much different would life have been for us if we could have gone to better colleges? You're searching for jobs after law school. I'm like, I wouldn't have to search for a job if I had gone to Harvard, right? People would have been searching for me. So what do I do for my child? So we got the application, and embedded in the application were three things that we now call a life template. Of course, Harvard asked for students that do well academically, but then there was this other thing. Second thing is that they wanted students who were world citizens, and then thirdly, they wanted students who cared for something greater than themselves. And we thought, that's very interesting. So we've now turned those three things into what we call intellectual ambition, global and cultural competency, and humanitarian drive. And we use those three elements to raise this young man. So the goal was that when he was 14, I wanted him to be done with high school. Okay. My wife thought that was utterly ridiculous. That was too soon. I think today, if you talk to her, she would say I was right. But anyway, he was done by 16. He was done at 16. He had finished all his high school coursework. He earned 33 college credits. He was fluent in 4 languages, and decided that he did not want to waste another year, senior year in high school, that he wanted to chase his dream of playing professional soccer. He needed to lead a country, he believed, to do that. So I hired a virtual assistant. His name is Nathan. He lives in Bangalore, India. And Nathan found 11 soccer clubs across the globe who were willing to have him come in for a tryout. Our favorite soccer team was the Brazilian national team. And so when we saw Brazil on the list, like, hey, let's contact people with Brazil. They offered him an opportunity to come over for some trials. We went to Brazil for some trials. We never saw him play with more joy than we did when he was in Brazil. And we said, okay, we got to figure out what to do. And he said, I've already figured it out. I'm staying. And so our son stayed in Brazil. So while his classmates returned to school in August, he was in Brazil playing soccer.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
Yep.
I am. So you have to understand why I'm flabbergasted. First of all, your wife was right. I think your wife was right. And I'm going to tell you why I think she was right. So I'm not going to just drop that and leave it. No, I think she was right because what I feel is that high school is such a challenging time emotionally that kids kind of need that time to catch up with themselves a little bit. You've got the hormones racing, you've got all kinds of distractions that could come into play. And it's almost like the terrible twos, or it has the potential to be. If you're not, and it's not that kids are bad, it's that they're just pushing their boundaries a little bit. And I think it's better to hold them a little closer during that time. So I agree with your wife. I don't know if she would really say that you were right, but if she would, I defer.
I think the part that she would say I was right about was, so let me tell you why I said 14. So what I did was I said, okay, listen, children spend age 5 or so to 17 in high school. They spend 12 years. Every summer, 3 months out of every summer, they're at home doing whatever. I said, we don't live in an agrarian society anymore. We're the main folks that talk about this learning loss that happens in the summer. So why would we ever stop learning? To me, it just seems ridiculous that anyone would ever say, let's stop learning. So I said, so if all we did was not stop, we could finish 4 years early. Right. And so that's all I said. So let's just not stop. And so she wasn't having it, but but he did start high school as a 7th grader. So he did start early. And like I said, by 16, his junior year, we were standing on top of the Grand Canyon, and it was in December of 2011. And I was going on about how great it felt, how alive I felt standing on top of the canyon. And he was like, yeah, it's great. I feel alive too. And he said, and by the way, Dad, next year, speaking of alive, I'm not going back to high school. I said, okay. He said, you always talking about dreaming and taking chances and living your life in the moment. Like, I don't know why we go back. It's just a waste of time. I've done everything that you've asked me to do. I've done everything. I've got, I'm just like, you're right. So, all right, okay. So now I've put my foot in my mouth, and now I have to figure out how I'm going to get a child out of the country and convince his mother, who doesn't know that we're having this conversation. She's just yelling at us to get off the edge of the canyon.
You don't tumble down, because moms worry about that.
You're 3,000 feet up in the air. She wants you to get away from the edge. And he and I are standing on the edge. And so I'm like, okay, but this is kind of how we have to live. You have to live on the edge. And so he said, yes, I do. I want to leave. That's
amazing and beautiful. And you certainly raised a young man who's adventurous and obviously very confident in his ability to take care of himself.
Yes. And he taught himself Portuguese in a month.
Very impressive. Very impressive. Let me ask you about that naming, because I'm curious. That seems to harken back to some African traditions where babies were not named initially. I don't know which culture specifically did this, which tribe specifically did this, but I've read about naming ceremonies.
Right.
Did you hold an actual naming ceremony after the name was determined?
We did. We did our best to do some research and find it. I wish we had the internet, and back we didn't. But we did our best. We watched Roots again, and and I had the fortune of while in graduate school of getting to know some folks who were Jewish and Muslim, and pick up some of the things from some of their traditions. And so at midnight on the 8th day, we took this baby outside. We washed him, took him out in a white garb, and unrobed him and held him up to the heavens and said, behold, the only one greater than you. Just the same way that I believe Kunta Kinte was at the beginning of Roots. Yeah. And
that's beautiful.
And we wrote some words and said some stuff. And my wife's mom was there. And so she was part of this ceremony. And yeah. So when the folks would say, did you baptize? I'm like, yeah, we did. We did something on the 8th day.
I think that's beautiful. I think that is absolutely beautiful to look back as best as we could pre-internet, to look back and really try to construct something that was meaningful. I mean, that's what we've done our whole lives here, right? Generation after generation, we've tried to reconstruct our African culture to the extent that we could in this environment. And I think that's so beautiful that you were able to do that.
Yeah, we made, I told people we made a lot of mistakes, but we got a few things right. And I think that was certainly one of the things that we got right. The naming him, Naim is Arabic, Kahari is Swahili, Turner is clearly a slave name. And, and then Bandeli is Yoruba, and it means born away from home. So we were set on Bandelli as the last name. We're like, okay, we're definitely naming our child. The last name is going to be born away from home. And I wanted to get rid of Turner altogether. And my mom begged and pleaded with me not to get rid of it. You know, that's your father's name. And I was like, okay, all right, we'll keep it. Daggone it. We'll keep the slave name if we must. So we kept it. And my mother was like, no, but why are you going to name your child that? Nobody's going to know how to pronounce his name. I was like, okay. Now it's funny, but look back on it and everybody knows.
I can imagine your mom feeling the way that she did, especially at that time, you know, because we still come from, because you and I are close in age, we still come from an assimilation generation in a lot of ways. So I want to ask, you're still a revolutionary. I can tell in the way that you speak, you're still a revolutionary. How do you hold on to that spirit, especially now? And we've had recent years where the young kids have been coming out into the streets and whatnot. But you and I went to school with the young Republicans who are now part of the problem that we have in this country, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And I did tag that IMO in case anybody has anything to say about it. But, you know, the young Republicans were vicious. I went to school with some of them. So how did you hold on to a revolutionary mindset after all of these years where that was really pushed down? It was all about greed is good, get your coins, you know, focus on getting ahead and don't worry about this other stuff. You can do more once you got your money and all that.
Yeah. Part of it is my name. So I just know there's no escaping that. Part of it is, I think we're responsible for legacy. So I'll say this. I tell people this all the time. So let me slow down a little bit. My wife says, I can see your brain working. I can hear it. I can hear it when you're talking. So let me slow down. So I am a fan of the word who. Like Simon Sinek has made the word why, like, oh, you got to know your why. I tell people all the time, I think that's utter nonsense. Only people with privilege talk about why. Mm-hmm. The rest of us should be focused on who, because who is what appears on your tombstone, who will appear in your obituary, and who will appear in your eulogy. Folks will come and they will speak about who you were, who you helped, who you served. Those are, I say, who you helped, who you served, and who knew that their life mattered because of you. I think that's what revolutionaries are supposed to do: help serve and make sure people know that they matter. So that's not lost on me. That's been drilled into me from the origin of my existence. But moreover, there are people who helped me to be here, for which I could not be here without them. And I can't repay them. 4 of the 5, I call them my starting 5. 4 of those 5 people are deceased. The 5th one is still living, and there's not an amount of money that I could give her that she would take. And so the only thing that they would ask me to do, right, is to pay it forward, and pay it forward doesn't have anything to do with me living in a big house and driving a nice shiny car or any of that stuff. So pay it forward is doing what the folks have done best historically, which is, uplifting. That's what I try to do.
That's beautiful. So tell me, what are you doing now?
Right now, I'm just talking to you, just on a Tuesday morning, having a great time talking to Michelle. What am I doing now? So I still work in the financial services industry. In case anyone's listening, I'm still doing that. Mostly, last 2 years ago, my family, my wife and son and I started a not-for-profit called the League of Extraordinary Parents. Mm-hmm. And we had enough parents ask us what we had done for our son and wanted to know if it was replicatable. So I backtrack just a little bit, Michelle. So in 2014, 9 went off to college. So he left in 2012. He was in Brazil until October of 2013, he had a concussion and came home. I won't say what happened with the medical treatment in Brazil. I just leave it to you to imagine. So he came home. We got him tested. He had a concussion and he had some form of amnesia, and it changed his personality for like 30 days to 60 days. He was very depressed, etc. At any rate, long story short, he decides he's ready to go to college now. He applies to 31 of America's top engineering schools. He gets into 27 of them.
Wow.
He gets more scholarship money than many schools graduating classes get on his own. He goes to school. He goes to Santa Clara University in California. He ends up getting his degree in electrical engineering, I think with an emphasis in computer science and computer engineering. He then applies for his PhD directly from undergrad. He gets 7 PhD fellowships. He's at Carnegie Mellon today. He's a 4th year PhD student in the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering.
Wow.
So folks would ask us, well, how did you do that? Right? You're not rich, and we know you didn't use Adobe Photoshop or any of that stuff. And so
you didn't put him on the rowing team?
I didn't put him on the rowing team. We didn't do any of that stuff, right? He didn't play soccer. One of the things he said when the coaches were trying to recruit him, he said, I don't want to play soccer. I went to Brazil to play professional soccer. I did not come back to America to go to college and play soccer.
Right.
I'm here to get my PhD.
Wow.
Okay. You'd have to meet him. He's very much. Yes. So folks would ask, well, what did you do? And we tell them, well, before he was born, right? We didn't name him. We bought language tapes. We played language tapes in his crib. We sang and danced with him. Our first computer we bought was his computer. So we started telling people the kinds of stuff that we were doing. And folks said, well, can you do it for other people's children? So we're like, yeah, we don't see why. So that's what we've been doing the last couple of years, is trying to show other families how to backward design their own children's life.
Wow. That's amazing. So do you prefer to work with families who are pregnant or going to be pregnant or already have had their kids and named their kids? What's your process like?
We've done both. I've worked with families who were pregnant. We worked with families whose children were, they were still toddlers. I worked with a 35-year-old 5 years ago who wanted to, you see that look. She's 35. She's one of my wife's sorors. And she said, hey, can we stop? I have a soror who's a teacher, and she wants to talk to me about educational leadership. I said, sure. So we stopped, and the young lady happened to be from Gary. So we had this conversation. Long story short, I said, well, what is it you want to do with your life? And she says, well, I guess I want to be a principal, and I just want to have a say in what happens in children's education. And I said, well, you think being a principal gives you a say? And she says, well, maybe not. Maybe I should be a superintendent. I said, well, okay, we'll be a superintendent. She says, well, how am I going to do that? I would need to get a PhD. I said, well, go and get a PhD. And she said, well, how am I going to get a PhD? I said, well, give me 45 days. I'll show you. And so, so we sat down and we backward designed what she wanted to do. And last month, she earned her PhD at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
Wow.
And she went to school on a full ride, and she's done. She's doctor now. So
all right.
Yeah. So yes, I have a young man we worked with. Started at 1. His mom was the one who asked me to first help her son. She says, "Can you help turn my son into your son 2.0?" And I was like, "What?" She says, "Yeah, I need my son to do what your son is doing, but I need him." I said, "Okay." So she invited a group of people twice to this open forum for this discussion about the community. And we called it Re-Engineering the Village, where I started to share with folks why we were looking at the world and raising children this way. And we started talking about, what's happening with technology that you're not aware of, what's going on with testing, what's going on with endowments with schools, what the projections are, and folks are, most of us are looking at me like I was crazy. Well, her son, she listened. Her son today speaks Mandarin. He's 9 or 10. He's fluent in Mandarin. He's also picking up Spanish. He's working on his pilot license, and he's like, Right.
That's
So
beautiful.
yeah. So it doesn't matter to me. It just
Right.
really matters if the people are going to be committed to doing the work.
That's amazing. I think it's fabulous. And that you were able to help someone at 35 re-engineer her life. You know, what'd you call it?
Backward design.
Backwards, backwards design what she wanted to do so that she could achieve her goals. So it sounds like you've got strong analysis skills, planning. Well, I'm trying to kind of pull out of here what it is that what you're doing for with people, because it's not for them. You're doing it with them.
Yes.
Right. So it sounds like you're taking, you're analyzing what it is they're trying to do, and you're helping them develop a plan for how to get from point A to point Z.
Right.
Because there are always a bunch of stops in between, particularly when you're younger.
Yes. So I had a group of folks that asked me, maybe it was in March, if I could help them. So I had 10 adults from the ages of 25 to 60. And so I created this course that we did online, and we called it Mission 5126. Mission in tribute to Harriet Tubman and all the missions that she had to help slaves become free. And 5126 in respect for James Dyson, the inventor of the Dyson vacuum cleaner, who had 5,126 failures before he had a success.
Wow.
So I tell folks, I say, okay, listen, the mission is not just for us to figure out how to get you to where you want to go, but it's to make sure that you're capable of helping someone else. And the 5126 is to understand that there's going to be more failure than there's going to be success, but you only need one success.
Right.
So we sort of worked this program where we talked about how to get to your North Star and what that was, and what was our Death Star, determining what that was, and helping folks start looking forward, which is something I do daily. I do this thing called journaling forward. So imagining your best life and then working backwards.
That's beautiful. And is that a course that you offer regularly, or you just did it that one time and said, oh, we're done? Yeah.
So they asked me to do it, and I was like, so they said, well, what are you doing now? And what are you working on now, Nate? And I said, well, I've got a book that I'm working on. And so I said, they said, okay, well, why don't would you show us what you're doing? And I said, okay, fine. So I'm like, I don't really know how to explain it, but I'll work it out. And each week we would meet on Sunday from 3 to 5, and we would go through these various steps. And so now they're off doing what it was that they said that they wanted to do, which is very interesting to see.
That's amazing. So it sounds like you're having an impact in a lot of different ways.
I'm going to leave here, and my responsibility is to lead the planet better than it was when I found it. So
that's beautiful. Well, Nate Turner, I don't even know what to say here. You've blown me away with the story, your story of your life, your son's life, and all you've accomplished. I know your wife must think you're a handful, though. So please send her my regards.
Condolences. Your condolences. Girl.
I know this has been a journey.
She's like, please, could you stop talking to me? Like, really? Yeah, yes. Can I tell you one final thing?
Yeah.
So my son and I are finishing this book. I think this is important to part this community thing we were talking about. I have this, and my son and I have this hope that one day we can construct a new version of Greenwood, but a version of Greenwood that's available for all people. And we have imagined this community in this book that we wrote called The Amazing World of STEM. Okay. And it's a children's story. And so the young man named STEM is Stuart Tyson Elmo Morgan. And he's named after 4 African-American scientists, engineers, et cetera. But the objective in the story is to show adults what's possible if we decide collectively as a humanity to come together and work together. So it's a community that has 3D printed homes, which we could do today for a little over $5,000. but we keep talking about a housing crisis, but here these kids have figured it out.
Right.
We don't have an energy issue because we're using solar and we're using biofuels. These children have figured it out. So they're aero farms, so we don't have any food deserts in this community because these children have figured it out. And we wanted to use the children because they are in fact the future. This is my son's generation's responsibility to move forward, although we've messed things up quite a bit, but we've tried to illustrate that through the book. I
think that's amazing. I thank you for sharing that. So where can people connect with you and where can they get the book?
You can connect with me anytime. You have my number, but don't everybody else. I have a website. It's Nathaniel, NathanielA Turner, TurnerCom. That's probably the easiest way to find me. And it'll link you to everything else that we're doing. I have a blog, Raising Superman, SUPAMAN.com, or the Raising Superman Project. And so that's where I write. And we have a YouTube page, etc., just like everybody else.
Okay, so they can connect to you on social media through your website.
Yep. You can find me on Twitter at Supermans_dad and at Instagram at Supermans_dad. But I'm not a big social media kind of guy. We don't have time to talk about my thoughts about social media. I'm not a big social.
There are a lot of interesting things about social media. We truly live in interesting times.
Yeah, it's a necessary evil, but I find it like it's precarious. Like, why don't Black folks have their own social media? Like if you're bothered, why don't we have enough Black engineers? My son's an engineer, and there's NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers. Why don't y'all have your own? Why don't we have our own platforms? I don't understand that. But at any rate, that's a discussion for another time.
Another discussion, because it's a lengthy one. That is definitely a lengthy one. Nate Turner, thank you so much for being on Somewhere in the Middle with Michelle Berard.
Thank you. That's where we live, Michelle, somewhere in the middle.